Hello and welcome. My name is Rashim Mogha, and I'm your host for this Empowered Women of the World podcast, a podcast where we talk about technology, leadership, and success. As AI continues to reshape industries across the board, architecture is notably among the early adopters, leveraging the technology to revolutionize traditional practices. While architects have embraced AI for its ability to enhance design processes, optimize resource allocation, and improve project management, they're still figuring out on the elements of bias, diversity, and responsible AI. So today on the eWOW podcast, I have Madhubala, design professional at Five Design Architectures and Interiors and a Silicon Valley woman of influence. She's a designer, a mentor, a sustainable design advocate with about 9 years of experience in commercial and residential architecture industry. She also serves on the board of American Institute of Architects, Silicon Valley, and is a recipient of Women of Influence Awards by Silicon Valley Business Journal. Madhu, I'm so excited to have you here today on the eWOW podcast, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. It's going to be very exciting.
Thank you so much, Rashim. I am also equally excited to have this conversation with you.
So let's start with the most pivotal moment in your architectural career. And what is your approach to design, keeping in mind that pivotal moment?
Sure, definitely. My most pivotal moment in my career would be my very first job right out of school. I just had graduated from my bachelor's in architecture from India, and I come from a very typical middle class background. Um, and I honestly didn't enjoy architecture that much when I was in school, to be very frank, but I was a very good student. So I had really good grades, and that helped me get my first job in Dubai. And I was really excited to be abroad for the first time working and all of that. So that's only when I started working as an architect, I truly understood the importance of the profession
Mm-hmm.
because that's a very small architectural firm. We had only about 30 people, and it was a setup more like a startup. So you had more responsibilities, even as an emerging professional. So that gave me a lot of insights into the industry for the very first time. I was doing a lot of commercial projects, like Dubai is known for its retail malls and
Yep.
hospitality, a lot of workplace. Those are the projects that I'm working on. And for the very first time, I felt responsible for the client's envisioning vision of a space, right? So when you're a student, you've worked on so many projects, but when you're a professional, you're responsible for the budget that the client comes with and the kind of space that they're going to live for the rest of their lives possibly. So that is only when I was really interested in pursuing this as my profession for the rest of my career. So yeah, I would say that's my pivotal moment. I was there for about 3 years, did variety of projects before I moved to the US for my master's because I really wanted to know more about the profession. So I would say my first job and my grad school at Penn State are some of the most pivotal moments in my career.
Yeah, and there's a difference between commercial and residential architecture as well, right? There are nuances to it. And I would love for you to go into a little bit of detail around those nuances before we move on to my next question around AI.
Definitely. I started off with commercial, so it's mostly big tech clients or some big restaurant chains or a healthcare provider for a clinic. So you are working with somebody in a corporate setting. So they have requirements, they have rollouts, or they have a certain vision in their mind for their brand to expand. So that's very business centric, but also very consumer centric. So you will have to work with those constraints in a commercial setting. In a commercial setting, a space is going to be used by a lot of people. It's very public oriented. So your design should be more inclusive of everybody that's going
Yeah.
to use the space. So I would say it's much fast paced and business centric and also public oriented. But when it comes to residential buildings, it's very personal, right? Like everybody has the dream of building their own dream home, and it is only a relevant to that particular person or family. So the needs are very personal and it's very subjective. So it's very important for designers to empathize with that particular family or a person who's going to live in that space and come up with a design solution that's exclusive for them. Sometimes it could be longer because it's personal, but I absolutely love the journey because at the end of the project, anybody that's going to live in the space is going to enjoy their time within the
Yeah.
space and they're going to make memories with their family. So that's much more personal. Whereas in commercial, it's a very different feeling where where everybody the whole public can use your space. So it's a different feeling. So I kind of like doing both. So that's my interpretation of both based on my experience. Yeah.
So, how do you think about AI and AI transforming the architecture industry? Talk to us about some of the potential
Sure.
benefits or challenges that you foresee as you start thinking about integrating AI into your design process.
Yeah. AI, especially living in the Bay Area, you can't ignore the rise of AI, and definitely architecture is no exception to it. But we've been using it in a very limited way. So AI has been instrumental in the way we design buildings.
Yeah.
But for now, we are only exploring softwares. There are a few softwares like Midjourney or Stable Diffusion or some plugins for Photoshop where it helps us with creating a lot of design iterations or stunning visuals, you can say. Those are the things that are circulating in the internet much faster these days. So it helps us in creating those design iterations much faster. But even now, for an actual project, I would still go to my sketchbook, do my initial sketches of a space or how that's going to look like. But with AI, it's much more easier for me to transfer that sketch into digital medium, right? So based on my sketch, AI is actually interpreting that sketch into an actual space. So by that, we are getting a lot of iterations in terms of design solutions where clients are very fascinated to see them and we are very fascinated to see them. So it just gives us that options in the very beginning stages of design. That is only one of the areas where I'm currently exploring AI, and it's been very efficient because before you will have to actually spend a lot of time actually curating each option by yourself, which is very time consuming. We used to do that before, but now it's much more easier and it helps us make faster decisions. And yeah, it's getting better in terms of efficiency. So we really like that.
So, we are on this podcast, and this is obviously the Empowered Women of the World podcast. In every conversation that I have, I know that bias plays such an important role in how an industry emerges and grows. How does bias impact the architecture industry?
So bias is built in all different ways in all industries, but I can talk from an architecture point of view. Being a woman and being a minority, it's a constant battle for people like me to prove our worth as a professional, right? Like if you just go and type architect in Google, you're just going to see mostly very straightforward white males. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's how it's perceived, at least in this part of the country. But it is changing, and we have a lot of women leaders coming up in the industry, and the industry is very supportive of them as well. There are a lot of opportunities for women leaders to shine and make a mark in the industry. So I'm very happy about that. But there are a lot of times where I've been in rooms or insights. I'll have contractors, consultants, client. You constantly have those meetings, and sometimes I wouldn't even realize that I'm the only woman in the room. It has happened quite a lot of times, but it didn't bother me much. But I don't think that's a very healthy ratio. We're trying to bring that up. Now there are more women in construction and not just architecture, also in construction. So it's a very I'm very happy to see that change happening. Apart from that, being a woman is just one thing, and then age is also another very important factor
Yeah.
when it comes to the industry because architecture is perceived as a very slow profession. And you see, most of the famous architects get their very first major gig project at 50 or so. That is how the industry has been so far. And I'm not denying that, because it's a lot more complicated. You have like 7 years of school, and then you have to finish your licensure. You have to work under somebody for 10, 15 years before you start your own firm. So that is the usual trend of anybody entering the architecture industry. So when you're an emerging professional, say you're in the first 10 years of career, you will have to learn, as much as you can from everybody around you. But I also feel like sometimes the newer generation of folks, be it Gen Z or millennials, they bring in some really unique perspectives that are very important to the profession as well, right? I'm sure experience is very important for somebody in the industry for 25 plus years. There is this gap between the very seasoned professional and emerging professional, and some kind of bias in not hearing those voices. And I feel like that should not be the case.
I specifically want to bring in the element of diversity as well. And more so when you start thinking about commercial places. When you are designing a place for public where there will be a lot of diverse audience or diverse footprint on that space, how does that impact the design? What
Yes.
is the role of diversity as you start thinking about designing for specifically for commercial or public places?
Yes, yeah. I'm so blessed, first of all, to be living in Bay Area with such diverse people around me. Like the teams that I work with in my design teams, consultants or construction teams are much. I could see people from all over the world, and I constantly feel like that's a great way for me to keep my perspectives fresh and open when I'm designing a space. Because when you talk to these people from different countries, they all multiple cultural experiences that you may not even know of, you may not even think about. Having worked in India, Middle East, and in the US, the preferences of people all over these places are very different, and you have to cater to them culturally as well, right? For example, Middle East has a very strong culture on religion, and when you design a space, you need to take that into consideration. Like they need a prayer room, as in they need one, and I'm sure US and India has such similar restrictions or challenges as well. So I have worked on firms with different people. There are firms that probably has a very monolithic cultural set of people, and the design solutions that come out of it is generally very standard. And when you work with people from multicultural backgrounds, you see that there are much more discussions around design, like how you're going to design, right from a restroom design to a mother's room. Like you need the female perspective when you're designing mother's room and what they actually need in a space, not just, yeah, there is a standard for mother's room and you just provide that. That's anybody can do that, but you need that perspective of what the recent needs of those mothers like. So you need to understand that from their perspective and then design a space. So these are some smaller examples, like when you're designing an urban environment, like safety for women in places like India are much more important. So you need to focus on the street infrastructure that will keep them safe, right? So these are some of the nuances that comes into play when you keep diversity as a center of your design. So everybody feels safe and welcome in the space that you're designing.
What aspects of environmentally responsible architecture are you exploring right now? I know green architecture is a thing. Cal Poly actually offers something around sustainable architecture. I want to understand how it's actually lived in the practitioner's arena, if you will.
Yeah, as you all know, like building industry like is one of the major contributors of carbon emissions, and because there's a lot of materials involved and materials imported from different places, not just the building as you see it as a building, but also a lot of the hidden costs that contribute to the carbon emissions. So as designers, it's our responsibility to reduce this contribution as much as we can, even though if you're going to design a building, you're going to contribute to the emissions. It's inevitable. But now there are a lot more standards. Like LEED has been there for a while. I'm sure you've seen the LEED badge in a lot of buildings where they say we are environmentally responsible, which means that they have done something in their design so that it doesn't contribute much to the emissions, right? So that is a way for them to promote that they're environmentally responsible, whoever is owning that building. So similarly, we have more standards coming up. We have something called Living Future accreditation, where even the materials that are coming into your site, they do the overall analysis of where it comes from. So it's a very stringent process, and they're trying to make sure that we use local materials, and we don't use much fuel on the transportation, for example. These are some very small, simple ways, but that contributes actually much bigger to the carbon emissions from the building industry. And California as a state is much more progressive. Our building codes itself, it's much more energy efficient. So if you're building building in California, you're already contributing positively to the planet by following those codes, right? And I'm very, very happy to be working in California that's progressive in terms of energy efficient design. And when it comes to interiors, when you're just renovating a space, probably you're not even building a space, that is going to be much more common in the coming days because you have a lot of buildings and probably you're going to reuse them instead of building everything from scratch. So when it comes to interior projects, it's mostly about the materials that you use, your paints to carpets to your wood flooring to anything of that sort. So when we work with such materials, we try to specify the products that are more responsible, that has some level of environmental declaration. So we look for all of that when we specify these materials. So these are small changes that we're trying to make that will eventually help with creating an environmentally responsible design. But post COVID, it's not just about the environment. People are also equally concerned about the wellness aspect of the space. They want to be in a very healthy space. Like they want to be in a space where there's a lot of daylight, where there's some greenery, and there's a lot of air circulation. That's a lot of constant fresh air circulation. So
An environment
these
that
are,
energizes you rather than drains,
yeah.
right?
See, you just don't want to be in a big box office building and work because you might as well work from home, right? If you want to go to office and work, or even if you're staying at home and working, you want your environment to be much healthier for you. And there are some standards that are focusing on the healthy aspects of interiors as well. So these are some of the things, recent trends that we're seeing. And one more thing is designing spaces that are neurodivergent inclusive. So people with different neurodivergent conditions have different needs when they are in a space, right? Some can work really well in a white noise environment. Some needs a really much focused space, and things like that. In schools, for example, you need to cater to children with such diverse neurodivergent needs. So these are the things that we're factoring into design so that people get those options when they're in a space.
This conversation is so exciting to me because oftentimes when we think about things, we do not go into the details of what the designers would have thought or architects would have thought while designing a space. It's exciting to see that so much thought actually goes in designing something. What is that one most important piece of advice that you have for women who are working in the industry or even ones who are thinking about going into this industry but don't know what to expect? How is the culture? Is it inclusive for women? Are women taken seriously in the conversations? Talk to me a little bit about the culture and the piece of advice that you have for women.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Architecture as an industry, like based on the statistics, right? Like in schools, there's equal amount of men and women in the architecture industry, but when it comes to practice, or probably after 10 years of career, the percentage drops significantly because it's a very demanding profession in the very, like there are a lot of long hours and things like that, which is changing recently. So I'm very happy about that. But it is a profession that requires extensive amount of study even after you finish school. You have to finish. It's more like you're doing your licensure exams along with work, which is like 7 exams that you'll have to pass to become an architect. And I feel women are um, constantly pushing their limits and being leaders in the industry. There are a lot of support from the industry in the recent days, especially if you're a woman or a minority, right? They want you to pass those exams and be a leader because they need you in the profession, and they're very supportive of that. It could be a little difficult in the beginning, but once you are past the 10-year mark, or once you're very confident as an architect, it's a very rewarding career, I would say, for women, for anybody for that matter. But especially women has some issues when it comes to any profession, right? They need to be very self-assured and confident about what they bring to the table, because it's going to take some time for you to build that confidence, and be patient when you build that confidence. Uh, and there will be a lot of people who will try to break that when you're growing and things like that. But just be very objective about your strengths, because you know that really well as your flaws. You're going to have both. Constantly work towards acknowledging your strengths, and try to reduce your flaws as much as you can. But it's a process. It's never going to be like you're going to be a perfect architect. That's not going to happen. But I would suggest you to seek mentorship from women that inspire you, and just get their guidance, because they've been through the path. They'll be able to guide you better. And I would say, just be an advocate for yourself in a workplace setting. I
Yeah.
don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. If you're very confident about the work that you're doing, or what you bring to the table, or what you're really good at, just talk about it, because women have this. Women don't do that often. Men don't find it difficult to do
Need to
that.
be our biggest cheerleaders.
Yeah. So I feel like women should do that for themselves. I'm sure there'll be advocates for you who can do that for you. They could be mentors who can do that for you. But I also feel like you should do that for yourselves, because you know your strengths much better than anybody else out there, right? And in a lot of firms, before, we used to have this issue of not having enough representation of women in leadership positions, but now that has changed a lot. So you can see there are people like you who are in leadership positions, so you can also do that. It's just about taking that path seriously, and just um, sticking through it, and advocating for yourselves. Those are few things I would definitely suggest you to do that. And more than that, many women also deal with imposter syndrome. Like, they just have to be perfect in everything, and they don't acknowledge the amazing work that they've already been doing, irrespective of the small flaws that they may have.
Absolutely.
uh, yeah. And sometimes they seek that validation from from a mentor, or from a partner, or from somebody else. So I would say, be your own critic, cheerleader, and take some risks, calculated risks, because that's going to help you in the longer run. You will be surprised at the things that can happen by just asking. So just ask for it, and even if you don't get it, I don't think you will regret
At
asking
least you
that.
would have tried, right? At least you would
Yeah.
have tried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just take a chance on yourself. Even if you failed, I don't think you'll regret the experience. You will only know when you try. Yeah.
Madhu, it was such a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for sharing your insights with our eWOW audience that's spread across 65 countries across the globe. And today's resource for you, my dear audience, is the link to my LinkedIn Learning course called Building Generative AI Tech Strategy. The link is in the show notes. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this course. This is being taken by thousands of learners across the globe, talks really about how to think about generative AI and bring it into your strategy. As always, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for loving, liking, supporting, and sharing the podcast. Remember, sharing is caring. I look forward to seeing you again in our next podcast. Till then, keep empowering the world.